Hello, friends and foes. Welcome to my channel. It's been a long time. I always say it's been a long time. Nothing's ever gonna change. I'm not gonna do a full mid-year freakout tag because I really have not been reading that much. My Goodreads goal I set as 52 books as per, I guess I only really did it last year. But like, I almost made it last year, so I was like, okay, let's do it again. Let's see. And I've read 16 books. So that's not a bad thing, frankly. I mean, considering I've just had a lot going on in my life. And it's not a competition, but I do just miss reading and I miss the community. And what better way to get back into reading than by talking about reading? I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if I talk about the books that I've read and like if I like them or not, then I'm hoping it'll reignite something in me. We're just gonna catch up. We're just gonna catch up and chat about the books that I've been reading since I have been gone. There's a St. Martin's Press boycott going on right now as of the time of filming, or at least that I know of as of the time of filming. I know that there's been some kind of like controversy around it. I honestly haven't been following it too much, but I do not want to, you know, cross any boundaries in the way. So there is at least one book on this list that I know is, you know, part of the boycott, so I won't be talking about that one. If any of the other ones on the list are part of it and I've made a mistake, I really apologize. I'm just going off of what I know, and I fully support the movement, and I hope that, you know, if you haven't heard of it yet, that this inspires you to look into it a little bit. Let's just get started. I started the year on a very high note. I started with a reread of Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I don't need to talk about this book. You know that I love this book. You know this is one of my favorite books ever, 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 ever. If you haven't read it, you should read it. And that's all I'll say on that. Then I read The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, which I talked about a little bit in my last video. It's now on my favorite shelf. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm not going to get too much into it just because I've already talked about it pretty in depth, but I just found that the way that he writes and the way that he decided to, you know, carry out each review was pretty striking to me. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Next, I read Short Talks by Carson, and that was for class. I took a class that was specifically focused on Carson, which was really, really interesting because I had read Autobiography of Red before and really, really loved it. I was just excited to have the chance to, you know, delve into her work specifically in class. This one, I didn't really give it a rating. I don't tend to rate the books that I've read for class unless I really, really enjoyed it or really, really didn't enjoy it. But I thought that the format was interesting. I thought that her approach was interesting. I think what was really enjoyable for me as a reader was that some moments would be really, really profound and then some would be completely confusing. And she's a very, like, kind of blunt and aloof person. So I feel like having read a lot of her work now, most of the time she doesn't like to talk about it so much. She kind of says what she says and that's that, and I can really appreciate that. But I think that it makes for an interesting reading experience because you don't necessarily like stick with one feeling or another feeling. You get this kind of jumbled up mix throughout. And I think what it kind of chalks up to is that it's a very interesting writing concept and practice. And I think that the format itself is what makes it interesting, not so much the actual individual poems. But it's a really quick read if any of you guys are interested in picking it up. I also don't think that there was anything really profound or salient or striking that stood out to me that I feel like mentioning. But it was also like 8 months ago now, so it's been a while and a lot has happened in between then. I will say though that part of what I had to do for class was write my own short talks, and I think that enhanced my reading experience. So do with that as you will. Moving on, the next thing I ended up reading was surprise, surprise, a reread of Betrayed by Emily Henry. I always end up really wanting to reread this one in like the January, February, winter months, and it always hits. It always hits. I love this book. I love Emily Henry. You're going to be hearing a lot more about her in this video and in future videos. Then for the Anne Carson class, I had to read some of the Fragments of Sappho from her translated collection. I did log that as a book. Sue me. Sue me. Okay. I read them, did I not? Did I not read them? Yes, I did. Did I read all of them? No. But that's none of your business, okay? I enjoyed it. I think it was very interesting. I think what was really enjoyable about that experience for me was having our discussions about translation and, you know, what role the translator plays in conveying a message, what kind of liberties they can take. Her way of formatting it with the breaks in the actual text and having them side by side. That formatting, I think, enhanced the reading experience. I did also read Men in the Off Hours by Anne Carson. That was the last book that I read for that class. I was also supposed to read Beauty of the Husband, but I didn't do it because I had a lot of stuff going on. But anywho, I read Men in the Off Hours and I really enjoyed that reading experience. I think what is interesting to talk about when it comes to Carson is the experience of reading her work and the way that she formats it and what she puts into it, rather than, you know, if I talk about a different story, a different poetry collection, I'm not going to be digging into those things so much. It might be because I did study them for class. That was the way the conversation went, so maybe that's why I think that it's more interesting to talk about her work that way, but that's how I'm going to talk about her work. Men in the Off Hours was so interesting because the entire time I was like, I don't necessarily understand how it comes together, but the way that she's putting things together, like her philosophy of writing, her philosophy of thinking that these things are sitting next to each other on her bookshelf, so they're automatically connected just by sheer proximity, and how she interprets that in her writing. I think that's fantastic, and I ended up doing my final project based on that concept. I think reading it again, it's just kind of like I'm along for the ride and I'm experiencing it, and then I'm gonna think about it afterwards. I'm not necessarily like critiquing it in the moment, but the way that she kind of talked about death and like it just it's been so long since I had to talk about it. I'm not remembering like specifics, but I'm just remembering how much I ended up loving it in the end. I think this is an underrated Carson. That's all I'll say. I think there's a lot to really dive into in this book. I think she does a lot, you know, for the form of writing as well as it standing as a piece on its own. And I feel like that's just kind of Carson's mode. Like that's what she does. Moving on, I kind of got into a little bit of a graphic novel moment. I read Making Friends, which was an enjoyable read. It was nice and light, and I thought that it had a lot of good stuff in it, but I think that ultimately it was one where the themes were just a little bit like sometimes I can take really salient stuff from a middle grade, whereas this was like, okay, this is pretty strictly middle grade in a way that I didn't hate reading it, but I also was like, this just isn't for me. And that's fine. It's a middle grade book. I am old. Like, it makes sense. I would be interested in maybe picking up the other books in the series if I was like finding them at the library or something, but I wouldn't go out of my way to pick them up myself, and I'm not in any rush just because it just wasn't the most striking graphic novel for me. I think that sometimes middle grade graphic novels can really get in there, and I think a perfect example of it is the next one that I'm going to mention, which is Seance Tea Party. It currently lives on my favorite shelf. I sobbed like a baby. I think that there's so much in it that you can really keep taking from, and it's an important message to learn when you're younger, but also an important message to be reminded of as you're getting older too. And I think that there's a lot of like multi-generational characters in the graphic novel that you can kind of see that played out in real time. You're not just inferring from the story that that's going to be important to you. It's that you're literally witnessing it happen. And I think that that one was just a really nice one. And I like the design. I like the art. I thought that the concept was really interesting, and I would definitely recommend. Over a larger chunk of time, I'd been reading Superfan. This one I ended up ultimately enjoying. It wasn't a super standout memoir for me, but I really enjoyed the format. Again, the idea of, you know, taking the concepts of things in pulp culture, different types of media that are important to you, and kind of applying them to your life and using them to explain morals and messages. I think it was a nice and enjoyable experience. Sometimes I didn't love the way that it was executed, but other times I really did. I think that it kind of functioned in the way that a short story anthology might. Some of the stories were stronger than others, and then some cases it was just that, like, me personally, I couldn't relate to them as much, which doesn't make them inherently worse or less strong, weaker, some might say, but it just means that it wasn't for me as much. But I think ultimately it was a pretty solid collection, just not particularly notable for me personally. Then, the moment you've all been waiting for, the new Emily Henry book came out. Funny story. And a funny story about funny story is when I first read it, I was like, wow, Emily Henry is great. She's just got it down, you know? Every single time I read one of her books, I know what's gonna eat. I know what's gonna eat. This one, however, it didn't hit me in the same way as the other ones did. It was like, yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. I don't think it was as, like, emotionally strong as some of her other ones. I don't think it didn't gut punch me, but I had a really great time. I like cry when I read her books, and I didn't cry while reading this one. So I was like, you know what? Solid, good. I really enjoyed it. Emily Henry, please never stop writing. But, you know, live, laugh, love. Or so I thought. Over time, it was like sizzling. It was simmering. I was letting it boil. I was letting the flavors, you know, I was letting it macerate, you know, getting that little, like, you know, put some basil in there, letting it kind of, the aromas, you know what I'm saying? I was letting that happen in the background while I was going about my daily life. And I kept being like, I'm thinking about this certain plot point from that book, or I'm thinking about this moment in the book. I'm thinking about their kind of relationship. I'm thinking about this storyline and arc that she's going through. And then I was like, you know what? I feel like I need to reread it. And that is a telltale sign of an Emily Henry great, because my two least favorite Emily Henry books, one of them I still haven't reread. The one I had to eventually reread after like a couple of years. Every other one I've read, I say every other one, there's like two other ones I've reread multiple times. And I usually get, on kind of like a clockwork basis, an urge to reread them. So that should have tipped me off. But the second time around, it hit. It was so good. I really loved it. I think that her kind of like, I don't know, I feel like I was trying to read a lot of stuff about, you know, learning to make friends and like putting yourself out there and finding your community. And so that kind of thematic in and of itself was like, okay, I see how it's hitting. But they're dynamic. I really enjoyed. I think there was something kind of, I'd say, like, I almost want to say insidious about their relationship dynamic and the way that it's written, where it was like upfront, first time going through it, I wasn't really affected by it at all. But like, it grew. And it didn't just grow on me. I wasn't like, I'm not a fan at first, and then now I was like, it's good at first. But then I started thinking. I feel like I'm just rambling at this point. I'm not saying anything coherent, but I haven't talked about this book yet, and I have to talk about an Emily Henry book at least 5 times in order to like hammer the point home. But just so you know, I love this one, and I did read it twice, so it does count as 2 books. So I missed the library in my hometown so much, so it's nice to go back and grab a few things. And I read The Magic Fish because I was in a graphic novel mood, and I really loved this one. I would definitely recommend it right off the hop. I think it was just really beautiful. It was really beautiful, and I think the art style was really gorgeous, but the story and the concept of using stories and cultural heritage and the things that are important to our upbringing, to our history as humans, as a way to bridge cultural and age divides, I think it was really well done. It's one of those stories where I'm like, I want everybody to read it. I want everybody to read it so that they understand it. I don't think that everybody is going to. I don't think a lot of people are going to, but I think this should be required reading in school. Then I read Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating, which again, I really enjoyed. I got into it. I read it pretty quickly. I thought it was a really cute story. I think there's a lot in it too that you can really delve into in terms of like cultural expectations and stereotypes. I just feel like it was, again, a little bit out of my age demographic, but I think it was still a good read nonetheless. Just one that I'd heard a lot of, you know, older readers and people on Book Talk and BookTube talk about in a really positive light, and I still I think it was really good, but I just don't think it was personally for me. I do kind of shy away from a YA romance at this point in time. They don't really compel me anymore, so I wasn't expecting it to be like life-changing by any means, but yeah, that's kind of where I stand on that. I would definitely recommend it, but probably for more of a younger reader. Then I read This Is How You Lose the Time War. Guys, I know, I hadn't read it until now. Listen, I've already read it though, so you can't retroactively get mad at me for not having read it, okay? That's not fair. I read it in one sitting. I sat outside for like 6 hours, and I was just like sunbathing and then jumping into the pool and then sunbathing and then jumping into the pool, and then every time I wasn't in the pool, I was reading. And I got the worst sunburn of my life because I was just doing that all day. I reapplied sunscreen. Let's be so real. I reapplied like 4 times, but this ginger skin is not built for that lifestyle. I really loved it. I thought it was so well done. I think it was a really interesting format, super compelling. I was honestly a bit surprised because I feel like it is kind of in the realm of like people who like the Raven Cycle, people who like the Locked Tomb. It feels like something that's in a very similar vein, but I haven't heard a lot of people say if you like the Locked Tomb, you'd like This Is How You Lose the Time War. But immediately I drew that connection. I was like, oh, yeah, this is kind of scratching the Locked Tomb itch. So if you happen to have not read it yet and you like the Locked Tomb, definitely pick it up. To me, I don't think it was, I give it about like a 4.5. It didn't hit the new favorite mark for me just because I feel like it was filling the void that the Locked Tomb left, not really doing anything different for me. But definitely 100% recommend. Then I read Junior High by Tegan and Sarah, which is the graphic novel version of their memoir, and they have kind of changed it a little bit. So like in their memoir, they're in high school, but in the graphic novel, they've changed it to junior high, and they've also set it in present day. So it's tweaked from their memoir, which I haven't read yet. They're like adult memoir. But I have watched the TV show adaptation of it, and I really enjoyed it. And I was interested to see how they would kind of mutate and play with the form to adapt the message and adapt the story. And I think it was really well done. I think that Tilly Walden illustrated it, and it was so beautiful, and I think that it was just really perfectly executed. I'm excited to hear that there's a second book coming out. I'll be very, very excited to pick that one up. The way that it's done, like using the visual language to separate the two twins, and then having, I don't know, it worked really well for me. I really enjoyed it. What really sold this one for me was the art style and the artistic choices that were made. Definitely, if you like graphic novels, pick this one up. That's it. Aside from anything that I've purposefully excluded, that is everything that I have read this year so far. I think honestly, it's been a good year for me reading wise, because I'm focusing on quality over quantity. You know, I've been setting down books that haven't really been gripping me. I've been focusing on myself. I've also been playing a ridiculous amount of Stardew Valley, and that's been eating up a lot of my time, and we're not going to talk about that. But I think it's been a year where I'm not looking at anything on this list and I'm like, I didn't enjoy that. It wasn't so much for me. There was only a couple of books in there where I was like, it wasn't my favorite, but I don't have anything particularly bad to say about it. It's more just, it didn't do anything particularly new or unique or really impactful for me right now, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad book or I didn't enjoy it or I didn't enjoy the reading experience or anything like that. I've kind of been taking what resonates with me and kind of, you know, following that lead instead of just reading everything all the time and focusing on being constantly reading and having to sort through the complications of that. I hope you're doing well though. I hope that you have a great rest of your week, rest of your day, rest of your night, and I will see you in my next video.